A soaked couch floated across the living room like a ghost. Above it, clinging to the narrow windowsill, stood a German shepherd, trembling, silent now. His fur was matted, slick with muddy water. One blue eye, one brown, both wide with something that looked a lot like resignation. He barked until his voice gave out. Now he just stared at the door. The one no one opened. Every hour, the flood crept higher. No one knew he was still inside. Or maybe they did and left anyway. The house groaned. The water touched his chest. And somewhere out there, someone was deciding whether to turn back. The rain didn't just fall that night. It crashed. Sheets of it, thick and angry, hammered down with a fury the small town hadn't seen in decades. What started as a steady downpour swelled into something no one was ready for. The river, long considered harmless, had crept past its banks overnight, swallowing lawns, creeping through fences, and rising inch by inch until the street signs disappeared beneath brown, rushing water. It happened fast. Too fast. One moment people were sipping coffee on their porches, the next they were being told to evacuate. Helicopters roared overhead. Sirens wailed. The town's main road looked more like a canal than a street, dotted with overturned trash bins and stranded cars. Panic ran faster than the floodwater. Families fled with what they could carry. Pets were scooped up in haste. Some weren't. In the middle of the chaos, an old man was lifted into a rescue chopper with a single bag of medication and a photograph folded into his shirt pocket. The paramedics were too rushed to ask if he had a dog. And maybe he didn't even have the strength to answer. On the porch he'd left behind was Zeus. He wasn't just any dog. He was a fixture in that neighborhood, towering and regal, yet gentle in the way only some dogs are born to be. He'd been seen trailing behind the old man on slow morning walks, his mismatched eyes, one soft brown, the other a ghostly blue, scanning everything like a silent sentry. Kids called him the Guardian. Stray cats kept their distance. And yet, in a moment of disaster, even Zeus had been forgotten. By dawn, the town was quiet. The rain had thinned to a drizzle, leaving behind a soggy silence, and streets transformed into shallow lakes. People assumed the worst was over, that whoever needed rescuing had already been found. But from the back of one battered house came the sound that shattered that illusion. A bark. Not loud, not wild. Just persistent. Strained. As if the dog wasn't crying for help, but simply reminding the world that he was still there. Most adults chalked it up to an echo. Some said it was probably just a dog on another block. But not everyone dismissed it. Lexi didn't. She was just 14, small for her age, quiet in a way that made people underestimate her. But she saw what others didn't. She'd spent enough hours volunteering at the animal shelter to know the sound of panic in a dog's voice. And this wasn't panic. This was pleading. She and her dad had gone walking near the edge of the neighborhood that morning, surveying the damage from higher ground. Lexi kept pausing, listening. And then, when she heard that bark again, low and muffled, but too steady to be her imagination, something inside her clicked. She followed the sound like it was a string pulling her forward. Her dad warned her to stay back. Said the ground was still unstable, that the house could collapse, that someone had probably already helped the dog. But she didn't move away, she moved closer. The water had swallowed the bottom floor. Toys floated beside couch cushions. A curtain flapped in the open window like a white flag. From inside came another bark. Weaker now. Hoarse. Zeus was still in there. Somewhere beneath the roof, behind walls now soft and waterlogged, he was holding on. And Lexi wasn't going to walk away. What makes someone go beyond fear? What flips that switch between watching and acting? Maybe it was the way her heart tightened with every bark. Or the memory of a shelter dog who'd looked just like Zeus and hadn't made it. Maybe it was something else, something quiet and instinctual, like all the noise of the world falling away until only one thing matters. She stepped toward the house, and with each step, the water grew deeper. No rescue crews, no emergency lights, no adults with radios or ropes, just a girl. And a dog waiting to be seen. The house stood still, sagging under the weight of water and silence. But inside, somewhere beyond the floodline and behind swollen doors, the guardian waited. Not barking anymore. Just waiting. What Lexi didn't know then, what no one could have known, was that the dog she was about to risk everything to save would save her too. But not today. Today was about courage, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't shout, it just steps forward into cold, muddy water. Because no one else will. And somewhere in that flooded house, Zeus was waiting. The house groaned with every passing second, its soaked frame sagging, its walls swelling like lungs under pressure. Windows fogged with condensation and grime gave no hint of what still breathed inside. The floodwaters had swallowed most of the first floor. What once had been a quiet dining room was now a murky, waist-deep pool of cold brown water. Floating debris, spoons, a toy soldier, a cracked photo frame, bobbed like forgotten memories, aimless and quiet. But from the far end of the room, behind a crooked doorway barely clinging to its hinges, something moved, a flash of fur. Then a soft, rhythmic scratching, followed by a low, guttural whimper that barely rose above the hush of water lapping against the walls. Zeus was still alive. Perched on top of a wooden dining table that had somehow stayed upright, the big German shepherd stood frozen, trembling, soaked to the chest. His paws shuffled uncertainly against the slippery surface, tail tucked tightly, eyes wide and locked on the only source of light that hadn't disappeared. The cracked window above the sink, where a pale beam of daylight filtered in. He didn't bark now. He didn't move. He just waited, as if hoping the sound of the water would quiet itself and this nightmare would end. But outside, no one was coming. First responders had already pulled out. The structure was too unstable. The water was rising by the hour, and no adult wanted to risk going in. Not for a dog, not even for one like him. They said the house wouldn't hold, that it was already leaning, that one wrong step could bring the whole thing down. The current was strong. There were nails, splintered boards, glass under the surface, a dozen reasons to stay back, all valid. But Lexi didn't ask for permission. By the time the adults finished weighing the danger, she was already moving, slipping past the caution tape and wading through the water, her breath short and sharp. The side of the house had a shattered window just above the floodline. Not high enough to be safe. Not low enough to make it easy. She hoisted herself through, legs soaked, hands scraped on old siding. But none of that mattered, not to her. Because somewhere inside was a dog who had never once left his owner's side. She wasn't going to leave his. Inside, the air was thick and sour. Mold, mildew, stagnant water. She pushed through it, arms wide for balance, stepping carefully between floating chairs and warped drawers. The floor creaked beneath her like it knew it shouldn't be holding weight. She whispered his name, gently at first, then louder. And then she saw him. He was thinner than she remembered, more fragile somehow, even though he was still so large. His eyes lit up the moment he saw her, but his body didn't move. His tail twitched once, just once, then fell still again. Maybe it was shock, or fear, or both. She didn't call again. She just moved. The door to the dining room was jammed, bloated from the water, wedged tight in its swollen frame. She pushed. Hard. Nothing. Tried again, her shoulder driving into it with everything she had. Still nothing. Her hands fumbled underwater, found a broken chair half sunk in the murk. She grabbed it, flipped it sideways, wedged one of its legs against the door. Pushed again. A crack. A shift. Then suddenly, it gave. The door drifted open an inch. Then another. Just enough. Zeus didn't wait for more. His feet splashed down, and he stepped into the water with the slow, trembling courage of something that wanted to believe it was being saved, but still wasn't sure. His legs moved stiffly, like he was unsure if they'd hold, but they did, and then he was beside her. Together, they turned back toward the window, but the house wasn't done. A sharp groan echoed from above, like wood being torn in half. Lexi looked up. The ceiling. A beam, waterlogged and cracking, split from its supports. She didn't think, just moved. Arms out, pulling Zeus with her through the rising water. The crash came behind them, deafening, as the beam slammed into the spot they'd stood just seconds before. Dust and splinters exploded into the air. She couldn't see, could barely breathe, but she felt his body next to hers, wet fur pressed to her side, powerful legs kicking just enough to keep him afloat. They made it to the window. Outside, her dad had seen them. He was waist-deep in the street, rope in hand, shouting, but the sound was a blur. All she knew was she needed to get out. The current tugged at her legs. The dog's weight nearly pulled her under, but she didn't let go. Couldn't. Her fingers closed around the rope. The last thing she saw before slipping back into the water was her father's face. Wide-eyed, pale, reaching out. And then the pull. Water rushed around her. The cold bit deep. But the rope held, and so did her grip. When they broke through the surface, coughing, shivering, gasping for air, the silence that followed was louder than the storm. Zeus pressed his head into her chest. She wrapped her arms around him. Behind them, the house groaned once more. Then it let go. The sky was soft and silver the next morning. The kind of calm that feels borrowed, like the world was holding its breath after too much chaos. The flood had receded, but the streets still shimmered with wet leaves and broken branches. Houses stood waterlogged and quiet, stitched with caution tape and mud. But on the sidewalk, walking slowly with a wrapped wrist and a stubborn limp, was Lexi. And beside her, his ears high, his stride steady despite all he'd endured, was Zeus. They moved together without words, just a rhythm between them. One forged not from months of training, but from a moment, one moment that had fused fear and trust into something permanent. She hadn't told many people how it felt inside that house. The creaking boards, the air so heavy with mildew it made her stomach turn. The way Zeus had looked at her, not like a dog waiting to be rescued, but like he already knew she wouldn't leave without him. She didn't explain that part to the reporters, or the camera crew, or the stranger who left flowers on their doorstep that morning. She just smiled and said the same quiet thing each time. I couldn't let him die alone. Now walking through the park they'd passed 100 times before, she noticed how still everything seemed. The usual joggers weren't out. The benches were empty. The playground swings moved only in the wind. Just the soft pad of Zeus's feet on the pavement. Just the cool, damp air in her lungs. But then, something changed. Zeus paused. His ears twitched, and then without warning, he lunged sideways. Not in panic. Not in fear. Just a firm, sudden pull toward a bench across the grass. Lexi blinked in surprise, trying to steady herself, but the moment she resisted, her balance faltered, her knees buckled. Then everything blurred. The world tilted sideways, the trees, the path, the sky above, spinning. Her breath caught in her chest, her vision narrowed. She felt her tongue grow heavy, her thoughts scattered like sand slipping through her fingers. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And then, she fell. It didn't make sense. There had been no warning, no headache, no pain. Just that strange, sudden blankness in her body, like her limbs had forgotten how to hold her. She lay there, blinking against the light, trying to say something, anything. But the words wouldn't come. Zeus stayed beside her, not barking, not panicking, just watching, waiting. And then, help. Footsteps. Someone rushing over, dropping to their knees, asking questions she couldn't answer. A phone. A 911 call. She remembered the sound of it. Urgent, distant, echoing behind the fog in her head. Later, in the hospital, the doctors used words like minor stroke and transient ischemic attack. They explained how lucky she was, how the timing saved her, how if no one had seen her fall, she could have lost the ability to speak, could have lost so much more. But she hadn't, because of him. No one could explain how Zeus knew. Not really. Her parents said maybe it was luck. Maybe the dog was just anxious, sensing the way she was moving, the subtle changes she didn't even notice. But Lexi didn't believe that. Not fully, because Zeus hadn't pulled away from her. He pulled her toward something, toward people, toward help. Before her body had even cried out, he had. He didn't panic like a dog reacting to danger. He responded like something deeper, something older, like he could hear the shift in her heartbeat. Feel the tremor in her hand, like he knew exactly what was coming before it arrived. The park bench, the stranger, the phone call, it all lined up too perfectly. There are moments in life that feel orchestrated, like something invisible reached through the chaos and nudged the world just enough to change the outcome. And this felt like one of them. Zeus didn't need to be rescued that day. He came into her life to rescue her. Not in a way anyone expected, not with flashing lights or dramatic headlines, but with something quieter, something more profound. A single tug on the leash, a moment of instinct, a choice to act, before anyone else even saw the danger. Lexi never called herself a hero again after that. She just looked at Zeus and knew. The real hero had been standing beside her the whole time. The house had fallen silent, not with peace, but with aftermath. Water stains still traced the walls like bruises left by something that didn't belong. Debris clung to tree trunks. Yards looked like forgotten war zones. The chaos had passed, but in its wake there was only the hum of fans, the crunch of broken wood under boots, and the occasional bark echoing down empty streets. And in the center of that quiet devastation was Lexi and Zeus. He stayed by her side like he'd been doing it his whole life. This dog, scrappy, soaked, barely recognizable the day she pulled him from that drowning house, had become her shadow. Not out of fear, not because he didn't have somewhere else to go, but because something invisible had stitched them together in those waterlogged hours. Some bond, forged under pressure, was now impossible to untangle. His real owner, still recovering in the hospital, had given Lexi his blessing through cracked lips and a teary nod. He'd seen the way Zeus watched her, heard how she spoke about the dog, like he was more than a rescue, like he was an anchor that had kept her from slipping under too. And maybe he had. The town didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. People had seen the footage, grainy, shaky video taken by a neighbor who happened to be filming when Lexi stumbled out of that house, her arms trembling, her clothes clinging to her skin, and that dog, his collar gripped tightly in her fist, following close behind like a soldier returning from battle. No words, just that look on her face and the way Zeus stayed right there as if making sure she wouldn't collapse. It spread quickly, first on local channels, then in rescue forums, then viral, fast, emotional, raw. The caption that caught fire was simple: she saved a dog. The next day the dog saved her. Because that part hadn't been caught on camera. No one had seen her fall in the park. No one but Zeus. No one had noticed her knees buckle or the way her eyes blurred as something unnameable unraveled inside her, something sudden, sharp, and terrifying. No one was there except him. Zeus didn't bark, didn't panic. He simply stayed beside her, refused to move. When she tried to wave him off, he leaned in. When she crumpled to the ground, he pressed his body against hers. And when a passerby finally rounded the bend and saw the scene, a woman slumped near a bench, a dog sitting like a statue beside her, it only took a second to realize it wasn't a coincidence. Later, doctors said if Lexi had been alone for 10 more minutes, she might have lost her speech. Might have lost more than that. A minor stroke, they called it. But the way Zeus had pulled her toward the bench just moments before it happened, like he'd sensed it, like he'd known, it was hard to explain. But no one really tried to explain it. They just called him what he was, a hero. And the strange thing? Lexi didn't seem surprised. She just smiled in that quiet way, like she already knew. Like she'd seen it in his eyes that first day, when the flood had swallowed everything and left them both gasping for something solid. The town rallied around the story. A fundraiser started, not just for Lexi, not just for Zeus, but for the dozens of animals displaced by the storm. The ones no one had found yet. The ones still waiting. Lexi stood at a shelter event weeks later, her voice calm but charged, telling a crowd about second chances. About how the flood didn't just wash things away, it uncovered things too. Like courage, like compassion, like a dog that knew where to be and when. She didn't cry when she spoke, but her voice trembled in that way that said everything had changed. And in the back of the crowd, Zeus sat quietly, watching her the way he always did, attentive. Still, unshakable, not as a pet, Not as a rescue, but as a partner in something neither of them had asked for, but both had somehow needed. Lexi never used the word miracle. She just said this: he's more than a dog. He's proof that sometimes we rescue each other. And in a world that can flood without warning, where water rises and the ground beneath your feet can vanish in seconds, that kind of rescue might be the only thing that lasts, even after the waters recede. Every year, storms roll in and leave behind more than just wreckage. They leave silence, empty porches, chewed-up collars tangled in fence posts, water lines that climb too high on the walls of homes that used to hold laughter, and pets who were never meant to be alone. Some are rescued, some aren't, but sometimes one is found. One small life, soaked, trembling, forgotten, pulled from the chaos by hands that refuse to let go. And in that fragile moment, something incredible happens. Not just survival, but connection. A kind of silent promise passed between two broken hearts that somehow still beat in sync. Because when one animal is saved, the story doesn't end there. It begins again. Sometimes that dog who was left behind becomes the one who stays, the one who waits outside the bathroom door, who watches every move like it matters, who senses something's wrong before the tears even fall. The one who doesn't just take up space in the house, but fills the emptiness no one else sees. Quietly, steadily, without needing words, as if they were sent for a reason. And maybe they were. And maybe that's why these stories stay with us. Why a soaked dog on a flooded porch becomes more than a headline, more than a post. Because in a world that often forgets the voiceless, they remember us. So if you believe in the ones who wait, who search, who rescue us right back, then let this story live beyond the screen. Share it. Let someone else feel what you just felt. And if your heart's still open, we have more stories waiting. More silent heroes. More paw prints left on lives that will never be the same. Because sometimes saving just one animal, it saves two souls.